Hello, hello. It's your Otter again. So, last time we watched half of the video of the part 2 for the second Punic Wars. So, today we're gonna watch the rest of that video. Basically, Hannibal kicked ass. Then got his eye removed because of swamp peanuts. So let's see how this keeps going, because Rome has some new consuls, and, well, one of them's a hothead again, and doing hot-headed things. This can only go terrible. But let's see how that goes.
For now, the Romans got nice and comfy in their beds. Good night, Flaminius. Good night, Rome.
Good night.
Good evening, Hannibal. During the night, Hannibal ordered total stealth. As tens of thousands of troops scaled the wooded hills above the pass, completely undetected by Rome's scouts.
Sounds like this is gonna be a fun battle for him. And with him I mean Hannibal.
Let's go, girls. Flaminius took off across the lake shore to try to catch Hannibal. As he did, even the weather seemed to be on Hannibal's side. A thick fog rose from the surface of the lake, obscuring visibility. Look at this!
Not
is
so good.
perfect. The mist will obscure our approach. Hannibal will never see me coming.
Yeah, but also, you will not see him coming.
Sir? Why does it sound like 50,000 Carthaginians are charging down the hill towards us? You mean 50,000 Carthaginians are charging right into my trap?
This sounds
Romans
less
found
like your
themselves
trap.
completely hemmed in on all sides. With zero visibility in the fog, the fighting was terrifying and chaotic. Troops were pushed into the lake in their heavy armor, where they were either cut down or drowned. And Flaminius, who likely stood out like a sore thumb in his consul attire, caught the attention of one Celt warrior, with his head possibly swirling with thoughts of how the Romans had decimated his homeland. According to the ancient writers, this Celt took his chance.
Epic!
In the 3-hour-long massacre, 15,000 Romans were killed, and an equal number captured. An
Well, that
entire
is,
army
again,
completely wiped out,
very embarrassing
along
for
with
Rome.
their consul. During the battle, the Roman vanguard had managed to break through at the front and climbed the hill above the fog. When the mist cleared, what they saw was a blood-red lake and a sea of Roman bodies.
That is just terrible.
Worse yet, when the other consuls sent cavalry to try to aid Flaminius's doomed legions, they too were caught and defeated. A double disaster.
That's what you get when you don't pay attention to your partners and
Rome
clan.
went into a frenzy.
Maybe
For
even
the
together.
second time, Hannibal had completely decimated an entire Roman army. Romans were dying by the tens of thousands. Common citizens began flocking to the city for safety. Women waited by the city gates in tears, hoping to hear news of loved ones. This one man, having just led his battered army across the Alps the previous year, now stood less than 100 miles from Rome. To this point, he had been a problem. Now, Hannibal was a crisis.
Oh yeah, I would definitely call it that, considering, I mean, he went out with 100,000 men from Spain, lost half his army on the way to the Alps, lost another half of that, so 50,000, then another 25,000 in the Alps, and then managed to actually beat the Romans, and then restock his army with Celts, back to 50,000, beat the Romans again, and now keeps going. And also went through a swamp and lost his eye, but like, this guy is crazy, and crazy good.
And in a crisis, Rome took desperate measures. They actually had a system in place when dealing with an emergency of this magnitude. They would forgo their two-consul power-sharing system, and instead temporarily give one man near total power and authority
who could
to
that
be as
be?
decisive as he needed, and hopefully salvage the situation. This all-powerful position
Scipio?
in Rome's government had a name: Dictator. It's actually where we get the word.
Oh yeah.
But unlike modern dictators, Roman ones didn't score perfect rounds of golf or ride bears through the Siberian tundra. They held their power for just 6 months before they were required to give it up.
Yeah,
And
old-timey
in Rome's
dictators
hour
were
of need,
a little
the
bit
man
better,
chosen
I
to
feel
be
like.
dictator in 217 BC, one of the most highly esteemed members of the Roman Senate, Fabius Maximus. So how would Fabius,
Well, Maximus
as dictator,
already is a good
confront
name for that.
Hannibal? Well, Fabius understood that marching all of Rome's young men straight into a one-man meat grinder was bleeding Rome dry. Hannibal was clearly too dangerous to face head-on in battle. However, he was also stuck in their territory, with dwindling manpower and forced to live off the land. It wasn't a sustainable position to be in long term, and he could only remain there for so long. So, if Rome avoided battle with Hannibal to prevent any more crippling losses, and instead simply maneuvered around him, blocking supplies and taking out smaller contingents where possible, Hannibal would gradually become weaker, while
Yeah,
they
that's a good
would
tactic.
gradually become stronger. And so
I just don't
Fabius
see where they
presented
would
his
get
new
stronger,
idea
but
to the Roman
yeah.
Senate. Okay, guys, I have an idea. See if you can follow me here, okay? Instead of fighting Hannibal when he
We run
approaches,
away.
we run away.
Genius. Or not.
Fabius's strategy couldn't have been any less Roman. Romans were meant to march headfirst into battle, not run away from it.
Yeah, but you gotta
It seemed cowardly,
adapt.
And Fabius was extremely unpopular. At this point, Hannibal was continuing south. He had to stay on the move to keep his army fed, and he was still aiming to undermine Rome's alliances in the south. As he went, in a calculated display of aggression, he devastated the Roman countryside and killed many Romans, all in plain sight of Fabius and his army. We're just gonna stand here? Yes. Are you a coward? No. But Fabius, that's my farm. Well, McDonald, thank you for your sacrifice. You're a hero now. Think of the stories you'll tell. Old
Damn.
McDonald had a farm.
And that's, guys,
But you know who
how the
else
song
hated
came to be.
Fabius's strategy? Hannibal.
Only because of that.
He understood the danger he was in.
Because
Turning
Roman
Rome's allies against
had
him
the name
required
MacDonald.
Hannibal to keep smashing the Romans in battle. He couldn't do that if Fabius wouldn't fight him. Multiple times, Hannibal tried to goad Fabius into a fight, but Fabius wouldn't bite. Failing that, he tried to turn Rome against Fabius. According to the writer Livy, he burned down all the farms he could, but any farm he learned was owned by Fabius himself. He left well alone. Hey, Fabius.
Well, that's
why are you burning
propaganda.
down your farm? You got some sort of a secret deal with him? What? Of course not. Hey, Hannibal! What? Burn my farm too, please! What? Burn my farm too, please! No! Remember our secret deal! Well, you gotta admit, he's a genius. Hannibal's
Yeah,
problem,
he is.
however, was that he had to stay on the move to keep supplying his army from the local lands. At one point, he entered Campania, one of the richest regions of Italy, great for resupplying, and great for showing up Fabius in front of Rome's South Italian allies. But he was caught in a valley, and Fabius quickly moved to block his escapes. Haha! We've got him! After he's used up all the valley's supplies, he'll starve. Sir?
Yeah, he will
What
never
are those
get out of
lights
there.
leaving the valley? Is he trying to escape? Lights in plain view. Well, that's a trap if I've ever seen one. And we're falling for it! Suspecting
Wow,
a trap, Fabius
idiots.
refused to budge. But other Romans in the valley rushed to confront Hannibal, only to find the Carthaginian army was actually just a herd of oxen with torches tied to their heads.
Well,
They
that's
then
a
found themselves
genius
caught
move.
in an ambush. With the Romans
Yeah,
distracted,
they're just
Hannibal's
go-getters
army was able
and
to slip
idiots.
away into the night, unopposed. Classic Hannibal. For all his inaction, the dissatisfied Romans mockingly dubbed him Fabius the Delayer. But the thing is, Fabius's strategy was probably the best thing he could have done.
Yeah.
He was right that constant
You
encounters
can't
with Hannibal
go
were
attack
bleeding
him.
Rome dry, and that
Like, you can't go to him because he already shown that he can just beat you. Like, there were like 3-4 major battles against him, and he just decisively won them. So just fighting him head on just doesn't work. So you have to adapt. And I think that how he is doing it is a very good approach. Sure, he's burning your land, but that's nothing you can't just rebuild. You know, you gotta win the war, and once you've done that, you can't just rebuild everything. But until then, it's suffering and sucks, but better than losing tens of thousands of men.
Time he took allowed Rome some breathing room to recover their forces when they desperately needed to, while putting Hannibal into an increasingly more difficult position.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Modern historians view Fabius's strategy as generally a good idea. To this day, the act
And I'm
of
not even a
engaging
historian.
an enemy, but instead gradually wearing them down, is still referred to as the Fabian strategy. But when Fabius's term finally came to an end, the Senate couldn't have been happier. It was time to start fighting again. However, they probably had a little chat about how they were going to go about it. See, Hannibal's tactics up until now had been very sneaky. Or, if you're a Roman, you might say dishonorable. I'm sick of it! Every time we try to take this guy down, we march straight at him. But then, oh no, Hannibal's hiding in a bush. Hannibal's got 30,000 men up a tree. At this
Yeah,
point,
up one
I'm
tree.
not convinced my wife isn't just Hannibal wearing a disguise. Look, this time we obviously have to switch something up. Now granted, we're Roman, so we're gonna march straight at him without thinking. That can't be helped. It's in our blood. But
Totally.
I have a proposition. This time, when we
Walks
march straight
up him,
we do
at
it
him at
with a
really
massive
fast.
army.
Or
I'm
really
talking like
hard, yeah.
80,000 men.
Sure.
It won't matter what kind of shenanigans he pulls.
I feel like
he can hide in all
that's
the bushes
still
he
not
wants.
gonna work.
There's no way he can possibly beat off 80,000 men. Grow up. You know what I mean? And so it was. With
I just
two
got
new
that.
consuls, Rome put together a massive army, the biggest Rome had ever fielded, to put Hannibal away once and for all. To gather the men required, 2/3 of them ended up being completely inexperienced. But how much experience does
Wow.
it take to be expendable war fodder? As
True.
this massive army set out in the summer of 216 BC, the Romans knew they needed to win this battle. Just one victory over Hannibal would likely be
looks
enough to
warm.
end his entire campaign. And this time, their overwhelming manpower gave them confidence they could do it. Hannibal had taken position at the town of
Whoa,
Cannae,
lovely
where
text.
he had captured an important Roman supply depot. With Fabius gone, Hannibal knew a battle was likely coming, and he was eager to fight it on his terms. But when his men looked out at the Roman camp, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. That army's huge! There's no way we can possibly beat off all these men. How are we gonna beat off all of these men? You know what I mean? I think he's right, Hannibal. Hannibal is then said to have replied, Gisco, my friend, don't worry. There may be a lot of them, but amongst their ranks, there's not a single man named Gisco. This joke was apparently so funny that his officers began to laugh and laugh. And when his men
But
in the
what if
camp heard
there
the
is?
laughter, they were like, hey, they're laughing. I guess that means we're gonna win the battle. Yippee! As for the Romans, the consuls were another pairing between an inexperienced hothead and a wise scholar. Although the main historian from this era was good friends with Paulus's family, so take that with a grain of salt. On his day of command, the rash and hasty Varro, despite the apparent pleas from Paulus, sent the army out for battle. And when
Yeah,
Hannibal
typical.
saw this, he did the same. And here comes the single largest battle of the Second Punic War, and one of the most renowned battles in history, the infamous Battle of Cannae. In all the pre-battle maneuvering, Hannibal was able to ensure his army
I have to
was fighting
say
to
it's
the
shame that
south.
I have no idea how
This
that
meant
went.
the seasonal dust-carrying winds were to his back and blowing directly into the
That's
faces of the
already a
Romans.
bad start for
Like
Rome.
I said, control. After 2 years in Italy, Hannibal's infantry had dwindled to about 40,000. The Romans possibly outnumbered him 2-1. Their army was so big that their maniples stretched far deeper than they normally would. The Romans planned to charge Hannibal's thin, weak line like a battering ram and break it. They also chose a narrow battlefield in
Yeah,
the
that would
hopes it would
definitely
prevent
work.
Hannibal's far superior cavalry from being able to outmaneuver them. They wanted
I mean,
an
that's how I
honorable
play
battle
Total War.
where pure strength rather than trickery would decide the outcome. If Hannibal had his say, however, trickery might end up having a lot to do with it. He ordered his line to position themselves as an outward bulge, with his weakest troops at the very center. Just behind them, out of sight from the Romans, stood the elite Libyan infantry, waiting for their moment to strike. The battle commenced as the massive Roman troops smashed into the Carthaginian center. The shape of Hannibal's line ensured the overwhelming weight of the Romans hit his weakest troops first, and they were pushed back. Hannibal's outward bulge reversed inward, with the Romans being funneled in towards the weak center. Hannibal had positioned himself at the center to encourage the troops to hold out as long as possible against the Roman onslaught, because while the Romans were unleashing carnage on the center, Hannibal's cavalry needed time to do their job. The heavy cavalry on the left, after a barbaric fight, sent the Roman horse packing, with the consul Paulus even sustaining a severe head injury. He managed to move into the center to keep the battle going. Then, the heavy cavalry turned and approached Varro's cavalry from behind.
Oh, they're
At
surrounded.
the first sight of the coming Carthaginian envelopment, Varro ordered his horsemen to flee the battlefield.
Wow, the
The
hothead
Carthaginians had
pussy.
won the cavalry battle. But back in the center, according to some accounts, Hannibal's line did eventually end up caving to the massive weight of the Romans, and they began to flee.
It's too
the
much.
Romans pushed deeper, and organization within the army likely broke down as they became a giant mass trying to massacre the fleeing Carthaginians.
That doesn't look
They
too good
didn't
now,
realize that
because
they were
now they're
playing
almost
right
surrounded.
into Hannibal's hands. At that moment, Hannibal's elite units, having done no fighting yet, and therefore fresh as a daisy, turned and smashed into the Roman sides. Many of these troops were wearing Roman helmets and armor they had picked up after previous battles, and the confused Romans may not have even realized they were the enemy. As Hannibal managed to regain the composure of his center and encourage them back into the fight, the Carthaginian cavalry swooped in from behind. And look at what lies before you.
That
A
is
military
sexy.
general's wet dream. The total encirclement of a much larger force by a much smaller force. The Romans were trapped. Hannibal had unbelievably managed to use their own superiority in numbers against them. Rather than simply encircling them, he had actually allowed them to use their own immense power and push themselves
encircled themselves.
into an encircled position. This was the genius of Cannae. And with that,
That was
the
crazy.
annihilation began. For hours, the Carthaginians slaughtered the helpless Romans from all sides. The terrified Romans were so tightly packed that at times they couldn't even lift their arms to defend themselves. The killing
That
went on
is
so
terrible.
long that the Carthaginians became exhausted from the non-stop massacre. And by the time the butchery came to an end, the grim toll spoke for itself. To Hannibal's several
70,000?
thousand lost, the Romans suffered 60 to
Jesus
80,000
Christ.
dead or captured. Yet another
Okay, at this
entire
point,
army
Rome
wiped out
should definitely
by
just
Hannibal.
surrender.
Many high-ranking Romans met their end at Cannae. Paulus, for one, but also 80 senators and more. It's been
That
estimated
sounds
that
like half the government.
20% of Rome's male population, aged 18 to 50, died at Cannae. This
Honestly,
was
that sounds almost like
Hannibal's
what is going on
vengeance.
in Ukraine with
The
Russia.
stunned Carthaginians, as they searched for their own survivors among the dead, couldn't believe the sight of it. An estimated 30,000 gallons of blood
Jesus
now lay
Christ.
spilled on the battlefield. Rome's defeat at Cannae sent shockwaves throughout Italy. Just as
Yeah, I feel
Hannibal
like
had
Rome
hoped,
is
most of
done.
southern Italy now defected to his side, including the second largest city on the peninsula. Wow. Hannibal, this is incredible. What could possibly come next? Next? Jim Bob. I've killed 150,000 Romans. I've turned her allies against her. That's it. That's vengeance. So let me
Yeah, I
tell
feel
you
like
what comes
one-upping
next.
that is,
Rome
I don't know.
surrenders. Their territories are reduced. We recover our lost islands. and Carthage dominates the Mediterranean once again.
That
But
sounds like a
what
logical
if they
plan.
don't surrender? Jim Bob,
And that's a
did
good
you
question.
miss what just happened? Of course they're gonna surrender. Throughout his campaign, Hannibal had shown himself to be very adept at reading the Roman mind. But if he now thought that Rome might surrender, it was the first time he severely underestimated them.
I mean,
And he
true.
was about
In
to
the first
discover
Punic Wars,
an
they also
extremely
never
inconvenient
surrendered.
fact about Rome. Rome never surrenders. At a Roman survivors' camp near Cannae, one young officer overheard some troops discussing how they would flee Rome. Drawing his sword, he threatened to cut down any man that would abandon Rome in its hour of need. That officer
Is it
was
Scipio?
the Younger.
It is
But
Scipio.
soon enough, the Romans would come to call him Scipio Africanus, the hero of Rome.
I guess I did hear that right. Like I said before, I think Scipio, or the Younger at least, is the reason why Rome is still was still standing. Yeah, coming soon. Really, I mean, it won't take a year to... I think it took a year. So, yeah, that's the conclusion of this video for now. Looks like there will be a twist. I mean, there has to be a twist. I feel like... I think Rome lived longer than at the year where we are in the video right now. So, let's see in the next one what Scipio is going to be up to and how he's going to stop Hannibal. But yeah, until then, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. And again, follow my wife's channel too. She's doing awesome stuff, mostly art and the occasional game. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Until then, have a nice day. Bye bye.